I'd like to call upon Bob Goulais, who's here to give us a Indigenous opening and also a presentation on behalf of the Indigenous Relations Circle. Please welcome Bob Goulais.
I'm going to keep you on time, Chris. But I notice your lack of one speaker, so if I go over an hour, I hope people don't mind. No, I'm just kidding. Again, my name is Mjakwat Migizian Dodem. Mjakwat is my Anishinaabe name. I'm of the Bald Eagle clan. When I say those things, that traditional Anishinaabe protocol greeting starts with my name, starts with my clan, which is our family. It starts with my community, Nibissing Anishinaabe. That's how we were taught to introduce ourselves in a formal way. It actually starts with the first word, which is the word Bojo. Very special word. Again, that's the name of the very first Anishinaabe. It was called Wena Bojo. So when I say Bojo to you, a lot of people think I'm trying to speak French. It's not bonjour, it's Bojo, the short form of the name Wena Bojo. It literally tells me, look into my eyes. See that I am Wena Bojo. I am Wena Bojo. Look at me. And by me telling you this, I'm telling you that we are all related. You know, it starts with that inclusion. You know, we are united, the Society of United Professionals. Well, we're united in more ways than anything, more ways than that one. We're united as human beings. As we say in our language, Nishnawbe. Nishnawbe doesn't mean just Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, you know, this nation. You know, a lot of our people feel that way. We're so focused on our own needs, and we'll have tunnel vision. And this is Anishinaabe, this is not. You know, this is Anishinaabe, you are not. Well, you know, I was taught, and you know, our word for the people is Anishinaabe. That, you know, when we described a person, before we discovered there were other races of people that came to Turtle Island, we discovered, you know, we're all people, and we called each other Nishnawbe. Nishnawbe is singular, Nishnaabeg is plural. You know, that's where we need to get back to as a society. That's going to be the focus of my talk today, is we need to decolonize our minds, decolonize how we think about Indigenous people. This morning, as the introduction is made, and as I'm looking, you know, around, you know, different gatherings, there's been gatherings in this building for a long, long time, including, I've never seen more Indigenous, you know, presence here. You know, I was coming up from the parking lot this morning, and I seen a gaggle of Anishinaabe Kwe kind of giggling, coming up the escalator, wondering where their room is. They've got their beautiful ribbon skirts on. They were all going to be here to sing a song for the Ontario Provincial Housing Association. Had nothing to do with my meeting, but, you know, they were so excited, and they've got their drums, and, you know, I stopped and talked with them a little bit. Just across the room, we were sharing breakfast space with the Association of Provincial University Counselors Association. And the first two names I seen on the name tag, you know, were two people I knew from Nibissing, from Dokis, and from Wikwemkong. So, you know, we're having more and more of our people involved. So again, I congratulate you for, you know, inviting me. Yes, last week was my sister Kim, who came in last year. My sister Kim Wheatley, who, you know, a lot better looking than I am in doing this, I gave that opening. But always described as Indigenous. On the thing, Indigenous Relations Circle. I think, you know, it makes sense. You know, Indigenous is a collective term. Indigenous refers to the collective of different people. Here in Canada, we refer to that as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. The word Indigenous is a collective of two or more First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. So when you look at me, or you look at Jeff, or you think of Kim last year, we are not Indigenous. We are not a collective of anything. We are individuals. You know, if you walk by on Queen Street and you're waving, hey, Bob, my Indigenous friend, hey, I'm going to look and continue walking. I identify as Anishinaabe, Nibissing Anishinaabe. You know, that's who I am. You know, I will tolerate First Nation, but the term First Nation is a colonial term. It's entirely in English. It's entirely arbitrary. Back in 1981, the National Indian Brotherhood, the national organization of what we call First Nations. They were called Indian bands back then. The National Association of Indian Bands was called the National Indian Brotherhood. Think about colonialism. National, Indian, Brotherhood. They sought a solution for, what do they call themselves? As, the Constitution's been passed, and we're moving on to, determining what's the best term for us. So they sent a commission, a group of chiefs around Canada. One of the elders stood up and took exception to the description of Canada. Said, Canada is more than just, the founding nations of Canada being French and English. That elder, very wise, said, we are the First Nations here. So those chiefs said, oh, that's the term we're going to use. We're going to take it across the country, and let's see what people think about the term First Nation. So everybody started to get excited about that, and it became the term we use. I remember very early on, I was in grade 6 or 5, even younger, in the Ojibwe language course. We're asked to give our names and where we're from. I was the only one that said Nipissing First Nation. I don't know, I guess I knew somehow that was the best term. People were saying we're from the Nipissing Band or Nipissing Reserve, Nipissing First Nation. But again, arbitrary. Today we're starting to return back to the words that we start to use. So that's where we need to look. Whenever we use the word Indigenous, I challenge you, think. Be mindful when you use those collective terms, Indigenous or Aboriginal. Perhaps in your career you've been using the word Indigenous to describe everything in their grandmother. But it's the collective. And I also, if you're going to invite, you're going to put an event together and you're going to invite all Indigenous people to come to, a gathering or a social or whatever, and you've got food, free food always brings in Indigenous people. If you're going to use that term and put it on the subway and on a subway poster, there's Indigenous people from all over the world. So you may not get who you want to get. So you want to be specific. So, beware of using that term Indigenous. I want to also start by, giving a bit of, not a biography, not a justification or rationale, but a little bit of knowledge of where this comes from, this way of life, this knowledge that's been given to me. Anybody watch The Fifth Estate last night? You watched no, a couple of you, right on. There was a documentary on Buffy St. Marie. It's been going around on Indigenous First Nations social media all week this week about this episode that's going to debunk Buffy St. Marie, that she was not Indigenous. And I was kind of, skeptical. Buffy is the one that was first doing this a long time ago. She was talking about, back when it was Indian rights and Indian culture. She was the first. She was on Sesame Street back in the 80s talking about these things. She was our beacon of hope and knowledge. But we found out over the course of the last week that she had lied about her where she was from. And even yesterday afternoon, I was skeptical. Maybe there's an explanation for this. Well, CBC produced the birth certificate, produced that these were indeed her birth parents, and they were Italian American people. Her relatives. Also, and there was all kinds of other data. It was very clear. So I was really disappointed and sad because of that. But that doesn't change the fact that she was adopted and accepted by Niihawin, Niiyaha people of the Piapot First Nation, and that's a nation in the Qu'Appelle Valley in Saskatchewan, Treaty 5, I think. The Niihawin people, our way of adoption is done before the Spirit. It's done in ceremony. When we adopt somebody, they become our family. Doesn't give her Indian blood, doesn't give her the right to, claim she's Indigenous, certainly doesn't excuse, her for lying or this sort of thing. But she is Niiyaha by culture, by family. She was taken in. She shared this knowledge. She, did that for us in that way. So a lot of people feel betrayed this morning, and it's, it's heavy on my heart as well. But we need to start looking at things not from blood quantum, 23andMe, Ancestry.com. We need to, not from the Constitution or Section 6 of the Indian Act. I could pull out my status card and show you I'm a status Indian. My mother-in-law can also do the same thing. She is 100% Saskatchewan farmer girl from Kindersley, Saskatchewan. But she, because of the Indian Act and those inequities, once she married my father-in-law, she became a status Indian. But that doesn't make, Buffy or others, Neaha by blood, but by family. That's what's important. The image you see on the screen there really is acknowledging all of that knowledge that's come before us. I acknowledge my teacher, Eddie Benton Benet, was the Grand Chief of our lodge. Badwewidan Benet Si, Jinkad, his Anishinaabe name is Badwewidan. He was the one that provided this way of life to us. To those ones that were young people back in the 60s and 70s, people like Jim Dumont, people like Murray Sinclair that we know today. Murray Sinclair is my uncle and is the Western Doorway Chief of our lodge. It was Eddie that gave us all of that to this day. We're so thankful for that. And just want to acknowledge all of that in that good way. There's a picture of Eddie. There's a picture of our lodge, the bottom two images there. These are our lodges before. We put coverings on them, but this is where our teachings come from. This is where we learn this way of life. So we need to reflect on where we receive these teachings, where this knowledge comes from. This comes from Anishinaabe people. Doesn't come from Indigenous, Aboriginal, Section 35, or the Indian Act. Comes from Anishinaabe people. The work that I do in my consulting company, Bissing Consulting, that I call my business. Of course, I incorporate it for tax reasons and all of those things to make sure that there's accounting is done and the government gets their share of taxes. I'm a tax-paying Canadian. My business is a corporation not exempt from Section 87 of the Indian Act, tax-paying people. Again, a lot of the contemporary stereotypes is First Nations people don't pay taxes. I recently had one of my accountant retired, and I got this new accountant, and I was thoroughly annoyed. They walk into my office and say, "Oh, I see a portion of your income is tax exempt. It must be great. Oh, geez, you're laughing. You're doing great." Like, that is our right as Anishinaabe. That's foreign taxation. I proceeded to give him some teachings on some of that. Still pay my share of taxes. My corporation still pays those taxes. But, again, that perception that, all of us are tax exempt. It's not true. We're tax-paying Canadians. But going back to the work that I do, I help a lot of my clients, governments, officials, all of that, in consultation, fulfilling and meeting the duty to consult. Well, I challenge my clients, and I challenge all of you, to look at changing the way we see things, the way we understand things, to decolonize our mind. It really starts with the individual. I wish I could say it starts with your organization, with your union. I wish I could say it starts with your employers and those people that all mean well. We all mean well. But it has to start here. It has to start with decolonizing ourselves, decolonizing our mind, moving from the work that I do, meaningful consultation, to question the word consultation. The reason why we're so focused on consultation, because in 2004, in two Supreme Court decisions, one on Haida Nation in BC, one on the Taku River decision in Alberta, the Supreme Court of Canada defined something that we today call the duty to consult. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But it was created by the Supreme Court of Canada. There are no First Nations, Métis, or Inuit on the Supreme Court. This was, again, a creation of colonization. So I don't even use the term consultation in my practice. I do not use it, and I encourage my clients, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about meaningful engagement, having conversations, having dialogue with one another, developing relationships. I know you folks are in labor. You work with labor relations with your employers, and as relationships amongst your employee groups that are members. We need to focus on engagement of people, not just consultation. And further than that, I'm also today going to talk about relationships. That first and foremost, we are human beings. And one of our basic needs, go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is connection. That we need that connection. That's something we all have in common. Whether you're the employer or the bargaining unit, bargaining agent, we're all people. That's something we can all relate to. And it begins with understanding values. Relationships need to begin with values. The image you see on the screen is what are called the 7 grandfather teachings of the Anishinaabe. They're called the 7 grandfathers not that Indigenous knowledge we call Anishinaabe Adsuin. So that's a little bit on the 7 grandfather teachings of the Anishinaabe. How many of you recognize this symbol? I opened up the curtain for Tracy and your friend. Do you see that symbol out there? Oh, it's open for everybody to see. And it looks beautiful. Everybody's doing selfies in front of it and have no idea what it is. It is the medicine wheel. The medicine wheel is a contemporary teaching tool. It's not traditional. It's not specific to the Anishinaabe. It's something we share to help us understand, teach, and learn some pretty complex multi-level teachings. But I often teach, when it comes to our work together, it needs to start with those values. There's a reason I spent some time in the 7 grandfather teachings. We want to share that balance that begins with values. We always interpret the medicine wheel from the east, and we go clockwise, just like the sun comes up in the east, goes across the sky, sets in the west. It's the way the medicine wheel works. It's got to start with those values. You know, it doesn't have to be Anishinaabe values when it comes to your own understanding. But if you want to include Anishinaabe people in this, and I'm using the word Anishinaabe to refer to all Indigenous people, just so you know, Haudenosaunee, Mi'kmaq, Mushkegowuk, Neaha, Wendat people. If you want to work with our people, it's got to start with values. We need to understand these things. I often teach, when it comes to working with First Nations, Métis, working with elders, that tobacco, you don't hire Bob as your consultant to create the tobacco tie and I go and, give that to the elder. You have to know what tobacco is for. You got to do that yourself. You got to put your thoughts, your prayers, your needs, and your words into that. Chris gave me that this morning. We sat aside and he asked me exactly what he's looking for. I graciously accepted that. It's got to start with, Anishinaabe ways of knowing and doing things. And it starts with values. With values, again, comes the importance of relationships. The most basic thing that I have to say this morning is that we are all people. Whether we're on the union side, the employer side, we're all people. Whether we have cats on our screen walk by when you're doing your WebEx and Zoom. Whether you have children running in, and we don't need to hide that. I'm really concerned about the term professionalism. What does professionalism? Is it European professionalism? Well, we all have children. How many have young children? How many people make sure you close the door and tell your kids to shut up so they don't make any noise while you're on your calls? Children make noise. Children come in. Children need your parents, even though you're on a call. We know that. But somehow we got to pretend we don't know that and come up with our business face online. Even though we're not wearing pants, you only see this part of us. We're all people. So it's got to start out with relationships, really understanding those things. Ways of being, that we call in our language Anishinaabe Adsuin, our ways of knowing and ways of being. We need to start looking at things from an Indigenous perspective, from Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Mushkegowuk, Neaha, Ojibwe, Mississauga, Algonquin, Mi'kmaq perspective. So that means we need to change how we did things here this morning. I smudged everybody. Thank you for those of you who included that smudge. You don't need to be a part of the smudge, but I made sure I brought it. I had to go in and out of the rows. In and out of the rows. When we gather as Anishinaabe, how do we gather? We gather in the circle. We all get front row seats when we're in the circle. So we need to look at ways of doing things. I often teach people in the public service about how we need to decolonize and indigenize the interview process. The interview process is the most colonial process ever. I ask people, what parts of the interview process is colonial? The answer is everything. We've been hiring people in the same way since the 1920s. The exact same way. Prior to that, you hire who you knew. Prior to that, you hired your relatives that can do the job. Today, we call that nepotism and unfair. Okay, I'll give you that. But since then, we wanted to make it fair. We wanted to make it transparent, give everybody a chance. Well, how has that worked for society? It's been a lot fairer if you're a middle-aged white guy in society today. So how do we buck that trend? Well, we need to look at, changing the way we do things, including the interview process. What does an interview process look like when you don't have a 1-hour time frame? I tell people, the minute you want to colonize something, put a time frame on it. Put a time frame. I know and I mentioned this to Michelle this morning, I know it's a labor tactic, And I know it's an employer tactic. Let's give them a deadline. December 15th, we don't have an agreement, then it's done. Well, if you've effectively colonized it, you've put that artificial pressure that didn't need to be there. Give yourself 12 months. Spend 3 months going and renting a place in the cottage somewhere and just get to know each other as people. All of a sudden you've got relationships and you know how to work together. You understand people have kids and cats and you become people. We need to indigenize these kinds of perspectives and ways. What does an interview process look like if there's an elder there? Making people feel comfortable. What does an interview process look like when you have translator, an interpreter there that perhaps, works in the language that somebody's more comfortable in? What does an interview process look like when the medicines are there to smudge people that may be going through trauma from the 60 Scoop, residential schools, addictions, mental wellness? You want them to be comfortable. So that's Indigenous ways of knowing. And then finally, there's learning. Again, I'm going to commit you. Don't just do the bare minimum when it comes to learning. Make this, we're learning about Anishinaabe ways, a lifelong obsession. Learning what you learn. There's so much in this land acknowledgement that Chris offered this morning. There is so much history in there. You could develop a whole curriculum just on what Chris talked about this morning and understanding those things and why society has decided to move in the direction that they did. There's so many ways of looking at that, and that requires that learning. But more than that, you see that beautiful symbol that's on the screen? What does it look like when we really indigenize that? Apipendawin, Inonendawin, and Odsawin, Gendasawin. Those are our Anishinaabe words for that. Again, we need to embrace how we see things, not how colonization has imposed knowledge on us. Including with the duty to consult. Very quickly, in that Supreme Court decision in 2004, the Supreme Court of Canada defined the duty to consult. If the Crown is going to consider conduct that may adversely impact Aboriginal treaty rights, there is now a constitutional duty to consult. I love it. The government's decision makers are required to talk to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Your employers, a lot of you are work for power companies. That's a part of the duty to consult. They have to legally discharge that duty. But I say we need to move beyond the duty to consult. I teach that the duty to consult is a bare minimum of the requirement. Oftentimes when I sit down with some people that you actually represent, I won't name any names, but the first thing when we talk about Indigenous relations, I'm sitting with a manager, I'm sitting with a director, perhaps a vice president, and I'm sitting with lawyers, concerned about discharging the duty to consult. The very first thing they want to send out, according to the federal guidance on discharging the duty to consult, is this letter called the Letter of Commencement. We as a organization, we as a government entity are empowered to consult with you. So consider this the Letter of Commencement. And it literally says we are going to work towards discharging the duty to consult. You're supposed to start with this letter. I have no place for that letter at all. By the time my clients still have to send out that letter, but by the time they've sent out that letter, I've met with those rights holders probably 3 or 4 times. They know exactly what's happening. I tell them when this letter is coming. I'll work them through it. I'll say, just to let you know, we've drafted the letter of commencement. It's gone up for approvals. Legal has it now. You'll get it in 2 weeks' time. Then we've disempowered the letter of commencement. It's not important. Relationships need to be important. Values need to be important. Moving beyond the duty to consult is moving beyond. And it has to start with engagement. Those discussions, those relationships. Have to tell you the truth that when it comes to the federal guidance on the duty to consult, you don't even talk to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit until the 2nd or 3rd phase of discharging the duty to consult. The first phase is always an environmental scan, a legal analysis, determining what claims are in the territory. And it describes in detail on how that's going to be assessed. And it takes months and months and months of time to get all of the lawyers together, consulting Natural Resources Canada, fisheries and oceans, environment, of course, Crown Indigenous Relations. It takes a lot of time to go through those first 2 phases. Then phase 2 is this ridiculous exercise where you pull out, they actually tell you, there's a description. You pull out a map. You take out your compass rose from grade 7 geography, or grade 7 mathematics. You remember these tools? You draw a 100-kilometer radius around this particular, I guess you do a GPS now. You put your 100-kilometer radius around your project. If there happens to be one of those claims you identified in phase 1, then you need to flag that. If there's a First Nation that's identified rights or interests in that territory, then you flag that. Then you create your what is it called, target list, your target audience. Those are the people you talk to. My advice is you need to talk with everybody that may be a treaty rights holder. If you're working in Kenora, you're talking to those 28 First Nations that belong to Treaty 3. 2 of them are in Manitoba. You need to talk to everybody in the treaty area. You need to talk to all those Métis councils and Regional Council Number 1 and the Métis Nation of Ontario. We need to talk with everybody. So it requires time to do that. Something I call the pre-engagement phase. Even before you've publicly announced your project, and I tell the employers this, even before you've announced the project, we should be meeting with those rights holders, having those conversations, establishing relationships. There's nothing worse, and catch me if you've been a project manager. You get a difficult project in front of you, and then you, as a project manager, have to assign Chris or Michelle or Tracy or Jeff to go out and consult with Aboriginal peoples, and you got 8 weeks to do it. You've colonized it with a time frame. You don't even know who to talk to. You don't know what the issues are. Develop those relationships first through pre-engagement. Determine ahead of time what those interests might be, how they want to engage. Set up those conversations. Beyond engagement is involvement. Are there ways to involve First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, even in your work as the Society of United Professionals? Are there ways to involve First Nations? Not just First Nations employees or the Indigenous Circle, but First Nation communities, chiefs, people that were part of the power gathering, was it last week or earlier this week? Are there opportunities to involve, to work directly with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit throughout your project? To collaborate. That's where I start my work, believe it or not. I don't even do the engagement and involvement. I go right to collaboration, co-developing engagement plans. Most models requested of us by the public service and government are to, you hire a consultant. You hire a communications consultant. Usually they're non-Aboriginal, non-Indigenous consultant. You require them to develop an engagement plan, to hire a facilitator, to rent a room here at the Sheridan. Then you put out invitations and you hope like heck, cross your fingers, that First Nations people come to that meeting. When I do my work, I co-develop that engagement plan with the people I'm talking to. They know better than even I do. And I've got 30, 40 years of experience, maybe not 40, 30 years of experience doing this. They know better than I do how to engage their community. They know better. They'll let us know how to do that. They'll let us know when they're available or not. That's the biggest mistake, is you schedule a meeting, we don't know how, these are busy, busy folks. So that's collaboration. Co-development is going to be a key word moving forward. And hopefully that leads to partnership, where we empower First Nations. I guess provide is the wrong example here, wrong word. We empower First Nations, Métis, Inuit to have an equal say, to have a stake in development. And some of your employers have realized this. You want to develop a hydroelectric project in Northern Ontario, you're not going to demand it to be done in the way the government or the regulator requires it. Those will only get passed with true partnerships. And we're talking about true partnerships, not small P partnerships, capital P partnerships, 50% plus one. Just ask Premier Ford in the Ring of Fire. He wants to get on his bulldozer and get it done. You're not going to get that done without partnership, without true equity, without providing that empowerment to communities. And the outcome to that is shared decision making. Which leads me to my last bit of my talk, and then I'm going to come to question and answers. Some wise practices we call Bwakawin. And it starts with number 1, to strive for meaningful engagement rather than consultation. Focus on engagement. Focus on dialogue and meaningful from the First Nation perspective, Métis perspective, Inuit perspective. Meaningful engagement rather than meeting a duty to consult. Number 2, be values-based. Those are my 3 values there. In everything I do in my work with First Nations, Métis, Inuit, is to be respectful, to be meaningful, and to be collaborative. And then consider integrating Indigenous values, those 7 grandfather teachings. How do we do that? Ways of being, the circle. What does that look like? Number 3, be relationship focused rather than project focused. Far too often, the only time we talk to First Nations, Métis, Inuit is if we need something. We need to develop those relationships. And I even advise some of my clients, develop those relationships and have those meetings even if you don't have anything to talk to them about. Just deliver gifts, have ceremony. Order a batch of Kentucky Fried Chicken and bring it. It's literally, Carry the Kettle First Nation with TransCanada Energy has a Kentucky Fried Chicken Day, and it's the most successful feast day of the entire year. You get hundreds of people coming in to get their handful of that chicken. I'm a big fan of fried chicken. Number 4, strive towards co-development and shared decision-making. Co-development is going to be a key word ahead of time, in the next little while. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples requires, it says at least 5 or 6 times in the document, that we need to move towards a free, prior, and informed consent on so many things. In order to find that consent, we need to co-develop things. We need to really understand these things. Consider establishing formal partnerships. And a lot of your employers do this pretty well. And I'm sure some of the work that you're involved is as part of that. But even as a society, consider memorandum of understanding with Indigenous organizations, partnership agreements, benefit agreements. So formalize those. Invest in Indigenous capacity. You want to bring in elders. Elders are a good example. We want to have a council of elders sitting here from First Nations, Métis, Inuit communities. Well, they're going to need a room, just like you need a room. They're going to need perhaps an honorarium. They don't get paid like you get paid from your employers. They might need that. You'll need to make sure tobacco is there. So you'll need to consider investing that, making sure that's in your budget. And then last few, considered action and implementation of those TRC calls to action. You got a great chart that Chris put up there, and you can see again, very few have had a lot of success. A few of them, a few key ones are moving on some of those. But how can you as an organization contribute to that, to those calls to action, to the United Nations Declaration? Call to action number 57 is so important. 92 also very important, providing an education to your workforce on Indigenous relations, on history, on culture. Start with that. Very, very important. Be trauma informed. I really like the statement that you did earlier. We are impacted by a lot of these things. I'm impacted by what happened on CBC last night. I'm impacted by that. So we need to be trauma informed. We might need specific skill sets if we are working with First Nations community on, understanding trauma. How to de-escalate conflict. I tell my clients, when you're going to be working with First Nations, Métis, Inuit, somebody mentioned going to the energy meeting earlier this week. Was it Michelle? Was that you? You're meeting with chiefs. I've worked with chiefs all my life. They are the epitome of, this is how you do this. I've been empowered by the Indian Act, and this is the way this is going to be. And you're going to very well listen. No wonder why our employers and our people are scared by First Nations. But are we scared of the kind Anishinaabe that exudes the value of respect and ways of knowing and ways of being? There's a reason why we are traumatized in that way. There's a reason why our chiefs and our warriors have to, demand things to be done the way they do, because of how we've been treated historically. We need to understand that. Not hire security to make sure we toss them out if things start to get rough. I've seen that being a solution for so many organizations. The AFN, they spend a lot. I worked there. I was the chief of staff to the national chief. You hire security to make sure things are, at peace. But, you go first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning for sunrise ceremony. There might be 7, 8 chiefs there. When we discover who we are, We start breaking through trauma. I'm waiting for the day where we get to a community meeting like that, or a chiefs meeting, and we got 80 chiefs there, 100 chiefs, 200 chiefs, starting to get these teachings. This teaching of the 7 grandfather teachings, what I taught you today in this first 50 minutes, you now know more about our inherent values than 80% in my own community by virtue of this 50 minutes together today. They've lost that because of what was taken away from them. Number 9, consider the diversity and wide-ranging diversity of community, the voices and needs of community. We're a very diverse community, very, very diverse. All of these nations that I talked about, all these nations that Chris talked about in his introduction, very, very different and distinct from one another. Different cultures, different ways we organize society, different ways we govern ourselves, different ways of practicing our ways of life. Our language is completely indecipherable. As different as somebody who grew up in Nigeria as somebody who grew up in the Philippines. Absolutely, incredibly distinct and different, indecipherable. We didn't work together. We weren't united indigenous nations until the Indian Act was established and we began to figure out ways to do things better. Very, very distinct nations and cultures with all different needs. And then finally, consider that meaningful engagement. Led and advised by Indigenous people. You can't incorporate those values of the 7 grandfather teachings without having Indigenous people, without having those elders here. Indigenous consultant doing all of those things. I don't have to teach about this because Chris took care of that. So, we need to understand, that we are on this journey together. That wampum belt, the white parts of the wampum belt represent a great, fast-moving river. Very turbulent river, moving perhaps from left to right. That we are sailing, we are paddling together on our 2 vessels, supporting each other. Again, there's a entire medicine wheel, that teaching that goes with this particular wampum belt, that talks about the importance of peace and friendship, but the other is respect, again, and recognition. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to put this up on the screen if you want to take a look, if you want to reach out to me individually or by email. But we have about 10 minutes for question and answers. So I'm happy to take any questions and answers you have. That's all the content I have, though. Thank you. So who's going to start out? Who's the first brave one in the audience? I promise I'll be gentle, if you could be gentle to me. Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
For our audience here today, you talked about the ribbon.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, this is our traditional regalia today. These aren't costumes. We hear about this in powwows. Oh, that's a beautiful costume. Can I touch your hair? All of these things. Yeah, not appropriate. These are not our costumes. I'm not pretending to be Indigenous. Some people, again, you can take a look at the controversy that's going on with pretendians and all of that, are using these things to kind of legitimize who they are. But, this is our regalia today. It shows our different colors. I chose this one. I didn't choose this one. My wife got this one for me because it's pretty. So not everything necessarily has, a meaning to it. It was meaningful for the designer. Did you get yours from Tammy Beauvais? Is that the Tammy Beauvais? No? Got yours especially made? Yeah, so a lot of us, when we get our ribbon shirts or ribbon skirts designed, we have our traditional colors. For us as Anishinaabe, our colors come from our clan system. But this just happens to be, I really love the bear paw here, and it was given to me as a gift. So it's part of our regalia to, show that, we're proud of who we are. That, we've committed to living this way of life and committed to, being brave. That teaching of the bear is important to me. It helps me. This is my superhero costume. It helps me be brave in my speaking. Yeah. So thanks. Thanks for starting off. Yes, sir. You're welcome.
Right, and we negotiate.
Oh, thanks. Look at that.
Okay.
Talking stick.
I love a microphone. Okay, so we have to negotiate, every few years a new collective agreement with our employers, and right now we're turning our minds to Indigenous needs in terms of funeral, arrangements and specialized agreements. But we haven't, in a lot of cases, this is the tough one, is to establish a relationship like you were saying earlier. What would be your suggestion, I would say, to a person that really is brand new to the whole process, doesn't have any real connections with our local Indigenous First Nations, and how to do an outreach before we start to, get to the point where we understand how to create language in our collective agreement that's supportive of Indigenous employees?
Call to action number 57 and 92 are key, and this is so important to answer your question. It starts with education. We can't have reconciliation without truth, and it requires a training program. So hopefully you as an organization have a training program. Hopefully your employers have a training program. Hopefully you as a union agree that this should be mandatory. And this is where we start to, all of a sudden, oh, mandatory, oh my God, we can't take this to our membership. All of a sudden, we're resistant to that. This training has to be mandatory, for that employee that's coming on. So I'm looking for the day when a union says, darn right, we agree with that. And we are going to make that our position, and it's never going to change. That we're going to commit to ensuring that our employers know, and that we as an organization understand that central to truth and reconciliation is truth, learning, and understanding these things. And it's not just one course either. I offer a 4-hour cultural competency course that's mandatory for the folks across the way, and the City of Toronto employees. Pretty big public service there, 35,000 employees. They get 4 hours, and then they meet that requirement, they get their checkbox. When I do my sessions online, I get about 5 or 6 employees that have their cameras on. The rest, I don't know who they're at. And how do I gauge how well I've done? And it shouldn't be on me. But at the end of my session, I stay on when I get some time to answer questions. I tell you the truth that I always have about 6 or 7 people that have their cameras on, their WebEx running, and it'll be, I've come back and logged on, and they were still on in the afternoon. People that weren't listening, weren't learning. They just were meeting their requirements and having their WebEx running, having their coffee, doing their email, and this wasn't important to them. I wish I could say to those people that were still on the line afterwards that I have to kick out of the room if I have meetings afterwards. I wish I could report to their employer that these people didn't make the requirements. And I wish that you as a union could support me on doing that. But again, we get a lot of pushback. Oh, this doesn't meet the collective agreement. This is unfair. Those people were there, they just, forgot they weren't able to turn off their camera. Well, we know the truth. Again, back to honesty, right? Were those people honestly learning? Did they learn anything? So education is key. So hopefully, again, imploring you as an organization as you move forward, this needs to be mandatory learning for not just your members, but all Canadians. We all need to understand why reconciliation is important. Yeah.
Thank
great.
you.
Awesome question. You just fed me that one. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Oh, here comes the mic. All right. This guy's Phil Donahue.
Thank you. So it's a pretty generic question, but perhaps you can share the vision or perhaps a vision that Indigenous communities have in terms of building relationship and establishing collaboration.
Okay, I have to tell you, in all seriousness, that these relationships, this work, reconciliation, is not front of mind for First Nations Métis Inuit. First Nations Métis Inuit couldn't care what your land acknowledgement is. They're just waiting like everyone else for you to, Chris, hurry up, how long is your land acknowledgement going to be? We have lost our ways of knowing and being. I'm telling you the truth when I said that in this short little exercise of learning these 7 grandfather teachings, you now know more than 80% in my home community about these values. So we've lost a lot of that. So what we need, and when it comes to the vision of relationships and doing that, is to have to empower our people to find our way, to have a say in what work that you do, to have a say in your organization, to have our elders there, and as we grow as people, as we start to decolonize ourselves, you have to decolonize. I challenge you to that early on. We need to decolonize as well. So we just want a seat at the table. And we want it to be meaningful change other. There's nothing worse than tokenism. I have to tell you that most projects that I get involved in, whether it's a proponent or a land developer, everybody wants to commemorate Indigenous peoples. Everybody wants to put up a plaque or a piece of public art. And I love art. I won't no shade on artists and the need for that. We need to see more of that. But 100% of the time when a designer or a proponent approaches me, it's all about commemorating the past. Oh, I appreciate the rich history of your people. I'm waiting for the moment where a client will approach me saying, I want to recognize the living culture of Anishinaabe people in this territory. I want to recognize the rich and bright future of Indigenous youth in this territory. I'm still waiting for that moment. So it's inclusion. It's being a part of what you have to offer, seeing a place in our society. I like to talk about reconciliation. There's a big definition from the TRC. I even have to look it up for myself. But simply put, reconciliation is about righting historical wrongs and reestablishing that balance of what that should have been. And what is your role in reestablishing that balance? So that's being inclusionary, partnerships, relationships. Thanks for your question. Appreciate that.
Hi. Recognizing that we are, at the moment, a primarily Ontario organization, but extending well into all the land parts of Ontario, what is a respectful term to use for the Indigenous people that we might encounter in those areas?
Yeah, my advice, going back to the very first answer, is education. It's learning. It's asking. It's preparing. I often teach that to public servants, those people that take my course. I always teach that we need to prepare. If you're going to be making a presentation to your boss, you're going to know the definitions. You're going to know what those appropriate terms are. If you're working with First Nations, Métis Inuit in different territories, we need to know what's the best terms to use. In this territory, we know that it's Mississauga. Far east part of our territory is Chippewa territory. This is also Wendat. This isn't Ojibwe, Mississauga, Huron, and Iroquois territory. We need to learn those terms from an Anishinaabe perspective, from a Haudenosaunee, Wendat perspective. And it takes preparation. It takes getting to know those things. So it's more than just, again, we go back to the generic Indigenous awareness of Section 35, Part 2 definitions, Indian Act definitions, that we need to really, use those terms that we use. And it's challenging. I have to tell you, it's challenging. Some Mi'kmaq words are difficult for me to say. But if you're going to be working regularly with these communities, recognize, that those are the terms we need to learn and need to use. All right, thanks very much. One more question, and then, we got 2 more questions. Are we still okay? Okay.
Yeah, so mine is going to be a quick one. I'm Leon.
Hey, Leon.
So, Bob, thank you for that presentation. I've learned so much, and I work in the training. We do have an extensive training program at Ontario Power Generation. So my colleague here and I, we work in that. But, a couple of things you mentioned was, 80% of your Indigenous folks aren't aware of this. Like, what are you doing or what is the community doing to spread this knowledge? And the other question I have is, we have certain words like miigwech that I've started to use in my vernacular, but some people say, well, you shouldn't be doing that because it's sort of cultural appropriation. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
That's honoring us by using our words. The people that will tell you it's cultural appropriation, I'm going to let you know and let you in on this. Those are the culture police I talked about.
Right.
You shouldn't be saying those words. You shouldn't be wearing that pin. You're dishonoring us. It comes from their own trauma, their own hurt. Use those words. Honor us. Our elders, our language teachers will love you using those words, starting with bojo, ending with miigwech. Those are our ways of knowing. I've got clients that I've worked with over the last few years that they've begun to learn our language. Not taking classes. You're not going to take the space of people by learning an Ojibwe language, but knowing those protocols, using them comfortably, using those words, our descriptions of each other comfortably. All of a sudden, that person is a person that that our community wants to work with. Yeah.
Miigwech,
In terms of,
Bob, yeah.
you're welcome. In terms of your first answer, it's a sad answer. And again, we need to explore trauma and colonization, the Indian Act, all these things. The answer is, what are our communities wanting to do to learn all this? Sum total of this much. We've been entirely acculturated, entirely assimilated. The only things we know are the Indian Act, cultural, this colonial way of knowing things. There's a few of us that are starting to find our way. People like Kim that you met last year, others that are carrying our eagle staffs, carrying our ways of knowing, part of our traditional societies. We're still doing that, but there's not a lot of investment. It was only less than 5 years ago that our nations here in Canada, we're talking about over 1 million First Nations in Canada today, 600 different bands. We were fighting over $5 million of language funding. $5 million. Now we're a bit more equitable. But, the source of identity and pride in our children and youth comes from our language, comes from our culture, understanding these things. Just like your cultures understand the importance of that. We need to start with identity. So we need to invest in that. So sadly, there's very little. I know because I wrote the language and cultural strategy for Nipissing First Nation. I submitted it about 5 years ago. Nothing's been implemented, nothing. So I'm hopeful though. All right. I don't want to end on a bad note though. So you get the last positive question.
Well, that's a little bit of pressure, but that's okay. I just wanted to say thank you very much
You're welcome.
for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh.
I think this has been a very inspiring discussion. I also wanted to thank you for opening the curtain because I've watched at least 100 pictures being taken with that symbol. And I so wish there was like a QR code or something that people could scan and then get the meaning behind the symbol.
Awesome.
But my question really is, if I'm starting my education journey, where is a good source of truth to start? Because there's so much information out there. Where is a good place to begin?
YouTube. Seriously, when I go to a new client that works with me and I say, how do I make a tobacco tie? How do I offer tobacco from a traditional perspective? I give them the link. Hey, take a look at this. But make sure you get the right sources. But there's a lot of books. I actually have a reconciliation reading list I share, and has books of all ages. So support an Indigenous author and they'll learn on your own. I wish I could say there was a class. But, it's not like non-Indigenous people can go to the Friendship Center and there's resources for them and classes. I wish there was, but there's not enough resources for even our own people. As soon as we open up a language offering to the public, you get 80 non-Indigenous people that are interested in signing up. A good example, the Friendship Center here in Toronto, the Native Canadian Center, had a powwow dance class that opened up. I know the instructor. And most of the people that signed up were non-Indigenous. They wanted to learn powwow dancing. Well, it's a great sentiment, but cultural appropriation, appropriateness, may not be appropriate. We don't want to design regalia for non-Indigenous people to be dancing at our powwows. So we need to find more spaces for ourselves. So definitely books, YouTube. Check out the Fifth Estate if you haven't seen that last night. Again, with a grain of salt though. There's a lot of more positive, beautiful stories about our people than, people trying to rip others down. But thanks very much everyone. I really appreciate the time. Sorry to be over time.